This week marked the 6th anniversary of the UK leaving the European Union. And it's all going very well, according to the architect of Boris Johnson's trade deal. In a speech this week to mark the anniversary, Lord Frost said that Brexit is working, and anyone who says otherwise must have an axe to grind. But he did admit that the Northern Ireland Protocol remained what he called unfinished business. Well, let's see if we can get any closer to the finishing line, because joining me now is the European Union's ambassador to the UK, João Vale de Almeida. Good morning, Ambassador.
Good morning.
Any chance that we might be able to resolve this problem? Can you see a way through?
We remain very much committed to that. We want to find a way out. I'm afraid the government's track is maybe, probably, unfortunately, a road to nowhere. And we would like to avoid that.
When you say it's a road to nowhere, you basically just dismissed what they're proposing. I mean, Mr. Lewis has told us that there's going to be a new bill and he's going to try to deal with the practical problems and so on. Are you just simply dismissing what they've offered?
No, we are not dismissing, but we read it very carefully, and we think, to be very frank, we think it is both illegal and unrealistic. It is illegal because it's a breach of international law, a breach of EU law, UK law, and international law. It's a treaty that we signed, ratified, and even went through a general election in this country. We also believe it is unrealistic because it does not provide a real alternative to the protocol. You know, we had long negotiations to trying to sort of square the circle around the problems created by Brexit and the kind of Brexit that was chosen in Northern Ireland. None of us, British side, our side, could find anything other than this platform to try to address those issues. We are committed to find the practical solutions on implementation, but we cannot start talking if the baseline is to say everything we have agreed before is to be put aside.
So we're at stalemate, really, aren't we?
For the moment we are. For the moment we are. But let me say that we are very committed to finding solutions. We've been to Northern Ireland several times. We talk all the time to Northern Ireland stakeholders, as much as we talk to our interlocutors here in London. And I think we found solutions for the problems, or the main problems that we found in implementing this protocol. We are about to reduce, or able and willing to reduce by 80% the sanitary checks, by 50% the paperwork on people. You know, normally if we apply the rules by the book, a lorry that carries different kinds of goods will have hundreds of pages of paperwork. We have reduced it to less than 3 pages per lorry. But there has to be controls, because this is about as much as protecting the Good Friday Agreement, to which we are very committed, but it's also about protecting the single market of the European Union.
All right, well, we'll watch this space. Let's turn to one of the biggest stories still, and that is Ukraine. It's announced this week that Ukraine has been granted EU candidate status. Chancellor Scholz of Germany says the EU's got to reform its voting rules before it can admit new member countries. It feels that though it's a great gesture, the likelihood of Ukraine joining the EU anytime soon seems rather small.
Well, Trevor, let's pause 1 second about the historic dimension of what we did this week in Brussels, of what our leaders agreed. It not only giving Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia a clear European perspective, meaning you are part of the family, you can be members of the European Union, it was given Ukraine and Moldova candidate status, meaning that from this week they are candidates to join the European Union. There's a long path ahead, of course. If I take my own case of Portugal, a small country in the west of Europe, it took us 9 years to get full membership of the European Union. It implies a lot of reforms. It implies a lot of alignment of policies and structures and legislation and rules inside Ukraine. But the signal we're giving this week is absolutely crucial. If you had asked me a year ago if that will be a likelihood before the invasion, before everything that happened, I would be very skeptical about it. Today, I'm enthusiastic about the prospect of giving our Ukrainian friends who are suffering so much this clear European perspective.
Well, you say there's a clear European perspective, but I think you will understand it. Ukrainians are taking this with a little bit pinch of salt when the member states themselves haven't presented an exactly united front. Mr. Macron wants to give Vladimir Putin concessions, and it's on the phone to him all the time, as far as we can make out. Germany accused of dragging its feet over weapons supplies. You can see why President Zelensky desperately wants to join the EU, but feels maybe the EU is supportive in word, but not necessarily in deeds.
We are supportive, but we are also responsible. The last thing I think we should provide the Ukrainians with is false hopes or false promises. We need to be realistic. Accession to full membership will take time. It will take effort on the Ukrainian side. It will also force us to certainly adapt some of our structures, some of our policies in order to, it's a 44 million people country, a large territory coming into the Union. Of course, this requires efforts on both sides. But let me be clear. This was a unanimous decision, and I think it's very important to note our countries have evolved. You named some of our leaders that maybe a few months ago had more doubts than they had this week. So the Union went a long way to address the needs and the requests and the aspirations of the Ukrainian people.
You're a diplomat, and I know you would shy away from anything that seemed even mildly critical of any of the EU's members. But over the past week, Gazprom, the Russian gas supplier, it's cut the supply through the Nord Stream pipeline by 60%. Do you think that the Russians could actually undermine EU solidarity because, frankly, the Germans depend on that, the Bulgarians depend on that, and that this is pressure that could crack that solidarity open?
Trevor, let me look back to the last few months. If President Putin's hope and goal was to divide us, if his goal and hope was to divide NATO, if it was to divide the UK from the EU on this type of issues, it totally failed. We have likely enlarged NATO, we have a strengthened European Union, we have very good cooperation with the UK as far as Ukraine and Russia is concerned, and we have adopted 6 packages of sanctions, targeting more than 1,200 people, 100 entities. We are cutting off basically the supply of oil by the end of the year. And of course, on gas, you mentioned gas. This is extremely sensitive for our country. So there's one thing we should never do, is to apply sanctions that hurt us more than it hurt our main target. And we need to make sure that we sustain the support of our voters to the sanctions. So they are calibrated, they are measured, but they are, I can guarantee you, hitting very hard the heart of the Russian economy.
All right, let's turn to a story which we've just been talking about with Mr. Lewis and also with Mr. Lamy, and that is the report that the government is planning to introduce steel tariffs to protect the UK steel industry. Some people believe that these would break the WTO, World Trade Organization, rules. We are staring down the barrel of a trade dispute, possibly a trade war, aren't we?
Well, I don't know the measures. I cannot comment on them. But in general terms, I don't think protectionism is the solution for any of our problems. Of course, we need to be attentive to the rules of the game, if everybody in the world trade scene is following them or not. And when we find this kind of non-compliance, we are very tough as well when it needs be. So again, I cannot comment on this, but I think our economies are facing a very difficult times, largely because we are just coming out of the COVID cycle and trying to implement very ambitious recovery measures, and we are hit by the consequences of the war, which, by the way, are not only hitting us. If you look at the food security situation in the world, I mean, the Russian troops are occupying the fields, they are blocking the ports, they are destroying the infrastructures in Ukraine, and they are assuming a very heavy load of responsibility in terms of creating possibly a wave of famine in the world. So it all goes back to what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. And that's why it's so important that we remain united, the EU and UK, and we're doing a good job on that. The EU itself, NATO, the whole Western world, but also that we bring on board countries from the South, because this is also their concern.
You are coming to the end of your term here. You'll be moving on no doubt to something...
Retiring, actually.
Oh,
Retiring,
I was going to say moving on to something even more glorious at the end of this year.
That's exactly the case, more glorious.
You said that you believe in life after Brexit. That's true for Britain, but it's also true for the European Union.
Yeah.
What do you envisage as the future for this large European Union with all the strains, not just the war, the Ukraine war, but all the other things that are going on? How is the EU going to hold together?
I think I'm maybe more optimistic than I was maybe a couple of years ago. What I've seen in our reaction to Brexit, where we stayed united, no other country even thought of considering leaving, and public opinion support has been strengthened. If I look at the reaction to COVID, where we were together responding to this crisis and responding in terms of recovery. If I look at the Ukraine situation, I was even surprised, let me say very clearly, by the boldness and the strength of our response to Ukraine. So if I take this very recent crisis, which we dealt with in a very solid way, I'm positive about the Union. But we will have always to adapt to new circumstances. It's a living animal. And that's what makes it so fascinating.
Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Trevor.
We wish you well in the next phase of your distinguished career.
I'm still here for a few months, don't worry about it.
Thank you very much indeed.
Very much.